Hello, everyone. This is Tanya McCausland from Diamond Six Leadership and Strategy. Let's see here. I want to get my recording started here, and then I will do a quick introduction. So thank you so much for joining us today for today's webinar. Our topic is crisis communications, how to leverage the right media channels to get your message out, with our social media expert, Molly Stark-Dean. My name is Tanya McCausland, like I mentioned. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Diamond Six Leadership and Strategy. I'll be assisting and hosting today's webinar. Our founder and CEO, Jeff McCausland, you can see here as well, will be speaking with Molly and facilitating today's discussion. We have quite a few new folks with us today. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you so much. If you've been joining us for the last several weeks, you know that we've been hosting these webinars every week for the last 3 to 4 weeks, just to be supportive to our community of clients out there who are also obviously experiencing some really different times, I guess is the best way to say it. For anyone joining us for the first time, I'd like to just take a minute to tell you about Diamond Six so you understand who we are, where we're coming from, and why we're doing these webinars. Diamond Six Leadership and Strategy is a leadership development business. We are located in central Pennsylvania. Our mission is to develop confident and effective leaders who make an impact in the world. And we do this through custom leadership development workshops for organizations, large school districts, and associations across the country. Our faculty members who work alongside of us are all distinguished, experienced, and deeply knowledgeable in various areas of individual and organizational leadership. And you can learn more about us at diamondsixleadership.com. In particular, if you go there, I do encourage you to check out our blog where we have quite a few articles and videos about leadership and our approach to that particular work. So first, I want to go over some quick administrative notes. Our schedule for today's webinar will go as follows. Jeff and Molly will cover today's topic for about 30 to 40 minutes or so, and then after that, we will take questions. If you have any administrative or technical issues, please use the chat function. My colleague, Bree, is standing by, and she can help you in any way she can. You are free to add questions to the Q&A area throughout the presentation. We will collect them, and I'll read them to Molly and Jeff during the Q&A, and they can answer your questions live. This webinar is being recorded, and everyone who is registered, which also means you because you're here, will receive a link to access the recording. And we post these recordings about 24 hours after the live webinar, and you'll be notified via email when it is actually available. If you find these webinars or this particular webinar to be helpful to you or your organization, please do us a favor and share the link that you'll be getting tomorrow to the recording with at least 3 people. We're doing these completely free. We want to be supportive to everyone, but it could be helpful to us, and you're free to share it with whoever you feel could benefit from this. So joining us today is Molly Stark-Dean. Molly has worked in newsrooms optimizing social media content strategy for over a decade. Places like CoinDesk, Reuters, CBS News Radio, Media Bistro, and Fox News Channel. Molly graduated from New York University with a Master's of Arts Journalism degree in their new Reporting and Nation program. At NYU, she interned for ABC News and USA Today. Molly taught audience development at the University of Missouri School of Journalism China program and at Media Bistro. So she has a lot of experience. Jeff and I have talked to her several times now. We're really excited to have her on today, because I know she's going to share some really, really valuable information with you today. So now I'm going to just hand it over to Jeff and Molly.
Hey, thanks very much, Molly. Or thanks very much, Tanya, I should say. I'm sorry. And thank you all once again for joining us for our weekly webinars. Before I begin, I want to do a real shout out to a couple of organizations and people out there. I noticed from the participants that we have folks in Minnesota, we have folks from Missouri, we have got some of our good friends in California, particularly from Walnut Valley, Beaumont, and Riverside. A real shout out to you guys and following what you're doing, particularly on Twitter and Facebook, and know that you all are doing the Lord's work out there, taking care of kids, transforming your platforms into online learning, providing free meals to kids, and doing all that in a remarkable way, showing what fantastic teams that you truly are. I want to thank a couple of personal friends who I know are on this particular call, John Reinhardt, Lily Wu from the from New York City, and the Teachers College program for principals in the New York City area. My good friend Rob Sanders from the Marco's Pizza Corporation, and my friend John Maffey. So welcome all of you to this particular chat, which I think will be great fun with Molly. Molly, let's start off by talking about communication strategies and consistency. You and I talked earlier about one of the initial webinars I did was talking about how leaders think in broad terms about leading in a crisis. One thing I said to the group at that time, touching on media, now going into it in more detail, was that one thing organizations, whether they're small or large, need to have is a consistency in message, and at the same time a consistency in voice, and that is making sure if you're a large organization that there's kind of one person that is the voice for the organization, be that for a school district. We work a lot at school districts, superintendent, board president perhaps, or a spokesperson. And second of all, taking control of your media outlets and thinking how you integrate them. I know you're going to talk about that more in terms of social media. So in terms of just thinking strategically about communication and consistency, I guess I'm looking for affirmation, Molly. Was that fair advice, number one? And please feel free to elaborate on that.
I think that it's great advice because you really need a central message sent by one or a group of people who all think the same way. So if you have messages coming out from your communications department and your PR department that conflict, you're going to be sending wrong messages. And it's always good to have one representative person. Hopefully you have one point person that collects all of the messaging and really filters everything through that person.
Let's move on from that, Molly, and talk a little bit about one of your specialties, which is particularly social media. Talk to the group a little bit about how do you better integrate, our traditional media outlets, whether it's the press, whether it's radio, and whether it's TV. And one thing that we try to do in working with, frankly, groups, corporations, as well as school districts and all police and nonprofit organizations across the country is really making sure they get to know who their local media people are. One of the watchwords I learned from being in the Army is, don't exchange business cards on the battlefield. Get to know each other before that you get to that particular crisis. And I know many have done that and probably taken advantage of that. So how to better integrate those traditional platforms, but now how to do that with social media tools to make sure that you're A, reaching a wider audience, and B, perhaps thinking through how I perhaps focus certain messages to certain elements of my team.
So when it comes to social media, it's always good to have a unified strategy across the whole organization. So you have to say the same things in different ways. A lot of social media management is about tailoring messaging for each platform so that it makes sense for the platform, both in format and in messaging. So the way you talk about things on Instagram is going to be different than, say, Twitter. So you all, even though you're saying different things, it all has to have the same back-end messaging that your social media people are talking to the PR people and the communications office of that organization.
What about, Molly, thinking about that for a second, is it a wise idea perhaps to make those messages recurrent and even, if you will, almost regular? In other words, would you advise somebody who heads up an organization to say, hey, you might want to get into the habit of whatever platform you use in social media, Facebook for the organization, Twitter perhaps, Instagram, whatever you're using. Is it a good idea to make that recurrent? Every day at 10 o'clock, I'm going to do this. So everybody on the team, everybody in the wider group of stakeholders you've got knows that's going to happen and can refer to that particular moment.
So it's always good to be consistent in your messaging, even in timing. So I have this strategy because I always think of things in terms of food, and it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So breakfast is LinkedIn, lunch is Twitter, and Facebook is dinner because of the timing of the messaging. when it comes to the amount of messaging, it's more important to do more on Twitter, because Twitter is this beast. You need to give it more messaging. On LinkedIn, you can be more sparing with your messaging. You could send 1 or 2 posts a day. On Instagram, I highly recommend just doing 1 post a day, because you're competing with your own posts on Instagram. The same way on Facebook, it's kind of a balance of the two, of sending out messages and making sure that you're seeing what type of messaging is working on which platform. Treating each platform different in terms of timing is very important, because you're going to get different messaging, and also, well, the same messaging, but just different timing. When it comes to email, which I consider the first social media network, you have to do once a day if is okay. Once a week is fine. You can let it sit in people's email boxes. You can always check the data on all of these platforms. They're all available, and you can see what posts are working and what posts aren't working.
In addition to the sort of timing, and I like that breakfast, lunch, and dinner thing. I think I might adopt that myself. Any other tricks that you can think of? Because obviously, no messaging is effective if people don't look at it, and I'm sure I'm not like a lot of people. I probably get 150 emails a day. Sometimes with a simple title, I'll know I automatically just delete it without looking at it. Any other tricks that you come across to make sure that people actually look at those posts as you follow those strategies?
So I did a lot of A/B testing in terms of newsletters when I was at Reuters, and all of our email newsletters were sent out from Reuters, which seems like a great strategy. People know that name, but then I did some testing, and I sent it from Dan Colarusso, who at the time, now he's at CNBC, but at the time he was the head of digital from Reuters. So it said editor's picks : Dan from, and the from was from Dan Colarusso. So you think that it's coming from a person. A lot of times on social media and in email, if it's coming from a person rather than an organization, sometimes that is a more weighted messaging, because it's coming from a person, and it's kind of like getting an email from Cuomo instead of the New York State government. I mean, if I opened an email from Cuomo, I wouldn't open an email from the New York State government.
What about using some of these platforms, Molly, for different verticals or stovepipes in an organization? I mean, traditionally, most organizations really are structured in a fashion where they realize or not, where they've got a personnel team, they've got a marketing or a sales team, they've got a logistics team. If it's a school district, they may have multiple logistics teams. They may have buildings and grounds. They may have food service. They may have transportation. So we have different, sort of verticals within the organization, different columns, if you will, in the organization. Do you think it's wise right now, in the particular environment we're in right now, where we're all kind of quarantined, to think about using particularly a social media device to communicate not only broadly with the entire team, but with individual elements? And I'm pulling this as an unlearned person, frankly. I'm pulling this out a little bit. Perhaps set up a Facebook page just for a particular team that they can all gravitate toward, share ideas and share practices along the way. Or are there other platforms that might be useful in that regard?
So it kind of depends on the organization and how it's structured. So if you have different communications teams for different departments, it's always good to have one central communications team. But if there's different verticals and they're all separated, it's always good to create different messaging for those teams, and even different platforms located to different teams, such as using Twitter just for one team because that's the type of communication that works for that specific team. Also, in terms of tools, I would use Hootsuite, which is a free platform, but it's freemium, so you can pay for it. And when you pay for it, you can create different teams and different approval processes for different messaging. And there are other social media dashboards that you can invest in, like Sprout Social Bakers for more data-oriented social media management. And then also, I would recommend Slack. Slack is a great tool for communication within an organization. And it's kind of just a chat room where you can talk to other people within your organization. And you can create different Slack channels for different verticals within your own organization.
Yeah, well, Molly, let me ask you to elaborate on that a little bit in terms of helpful online and social media tools organizations should consider right now. Just for the group as a whole, couple that Molly has mentioned, Hootsuite, Slack, and you'll probably toss in a couple others here in a second. We're going to make a listing of those and have that provided to participants shortly after this is done. But any other online and social media tools that you think organizations should look at now? Obviously, all of us have become, I think if we haven't, you better get there quick, somewhat of an expert on the use of Zoom, for example. Any others you can think of that you would recommend right now that organizations should consider?
There are reports recently about the privacy concerns with Zoom. So if you are an organization that cares about your customers or your own privacy, Zoom is a great platform for webinars such as this when we're trying to blast it out. But if you're looking for a more private video chat, I would say Google Hangouts you can use. You can use video chat on WhatsApp or on Facebook. Of course, Facebook has its own privacy concerns, so you have to weigh that within your own organization. Everybody should be used to video conferencing. It's kind of the new normal we're going to have to transition to. I, as a video person, I teach social media video, so I feel comfortable, but I want other people within if you find someone who's not comfortable with video within your organization, help them come over to the video, not revolution, but the video future of how you're going to be talking within an organization. When I've worked at global organizations such as Reuters and CBS News, and also Fox News Channel, it was always helpful to talk to people on the phone. I talk to people on the phone more often than I would email them. And when I call people, I say, I just saved you 10 emails, right? Because sometimes it's easier to communicate with people in different ways. I'm not going to text someone to tell them to come over or something like that, which nobody's going to come over, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, oftentimes when I talk about this from my experience working, at CBS, where Molly and I actually encountered each other, and a friend of mine who did a lot of communications work always said, your whole communications, individually or organizationally, exists on a cursor from what he called high touch to high tech. Mm-hmm. And the most high touch meeting is a physical meeting of one or more people in a standard meeting room around a table. That's high touch. And high tech is the extreme, and that's the email message to 1,000 people at a time. That's high tech. And you got to think for this message, what is the mechanism that is most appropriate, and then secondly most doable. Okay. Well, if I'm going to tell somebody they've been promoted or they've been fired, great news, really bad news, probably wouldn't want to do that in an email message. Most likely want to do that in person. Second best thing, call them on telephone. If I'm just going to tell everybody in a large organization, hey, we're all going to meet in the conference room tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock for an update, well, I can do that in an email message. And I found that's a good way mentally for me to think through messaging and what platforms might be most appropriate. And now those platforms are multiplying. Molly, any suggestions? A lot of the people on this call right now will be in education or associations, will be in large school districts or in some way or shape or form, or even if they're not, are now learning that they've got to become a lot more a lot more smart, it's a lot smarter about how they deal with social media. Any particular websites or online learning that you see that's being offered in the area of social media, where a person right now, and a lot of us have got a lot of free time, can go online to become smarter about Slack or Hootsuite or Instagram or whatever? Or are they all sort of individual? In other words, you have to go to those individual sites and look for the tutorials? Or have you seen anybody who's kind of bringing all those tutorials together and you can use it as sort of a shopping cart?
Actually, the websites of the social media dashboards, those are normally the best places because they span over all the different social media platforms. So Hootsuite, Sprout Social, and Social Bakers are three of the big ones that I can think of now. And then they are social media dashboards, and they write about social media as well. So there's a blog, they talk about all of these different strategies that you can use for your organization. Another good website is Media Bistro. It's where I taught for a little while, and you can get video courses such as this one. Also, LinkedIn Learning. You can use LinkedIn Learning to learn all sorts of different skills. And I think you have to be a Prime member to get LinkedIn Learning. I don't know what it's called, but you can go on LinkedIn and see what courses are available. That's a great place where you can get more information.
Well, again, a lot of folks are in education. Molly, have you seen any suggestions you have for them on, because many of them have been told, I've seen like colleges down to, school districts, hey, you've been great teaching for the last X number of years in a regular classroom, but tomorrow afternoon, I'd like you to transfer for everything you're doing to online learning. And so people are, learning as fast as they can as they're trying to execute at the same time. Any strategies, particularly in the area now of people who are trying to deliver learning, whether that learning is to a first grader or a college student along the way in this new environment?
A lot of it has to do with training yourself on some of these platforms. I teach in China, well, not recently, but I teach in China, and I speak through an interpreter, and I have hundreds and hundreds of students that I'm teaching to. That is completely the opposite of me sitting in my bedroom, in my one-bedroom apartment, talking to myself, creating these weird modules for Media Bistro. That's what I did for a long time. And actually last year I was teaching a class and I lost my voice. And there's nothing you can do. They just say, oh, you lost your voice, have honey and tea, which works and doesn't work. But you have to really focus on conveying a message using this platform. Just because you're talking to a screen, just imagine people being there. And different schools, I'm sure, are using different platforms. I was using an on-demand platform called Novio, but I don't know if they're doing live courses, which is a totally different skill set. You kind of have to be more nimble nowadays in education specifically.
Yeah, a lot of them are using, some use an older platform called Moodle, some use the latest variation on Blackboard.
Yeah.
Some are doing a combination, you're right, of strictly, online, where it's asynchronous education, where they post things the student operates from.
Yep.
Some are doing more synchronous education, like we're doing right now in some ways, where you're actually interacting with a faculty member, but it just varies from organization to organization. Well, let's move on to kind of a final question I've got for you, Molly. So oftentimes you can learn from bad examples as well as good examples. And as I've tried to say to the group in some of the talks that I've given, this is an opportunity to learn from this experience as we move towards new normal. What would some things be that you'd suggest that organizations should not be doing in their social media and communication strategies, or things that you've seen organizations, whether they're corporate, education, nonprofit, doesn't matter, that have implemented that really don't seem to have worked too well.
Sometimes automating processes is really great. It's an awesome idea, but I've seen there was a global newsroom I was in, and they had an automatic using Social Flow, which is another social media management dashboard. They had a huge fire hose of stories going through Social Flow. That ended up being a problem because a story about Muhammad Ali, who died, went through the algorithm, and because he died, that story was his name was trending. So the story they had in the queue was about his birthday, and it was happy-go-lucky birthday one, and it went out because his name was trending on the day he died. So there were lots of people online making fun of us, saying, oh, this news organization is resurrecting dead people now.
Yeah, I've actually integrated that in a couple of talks I've done, which talk on using the media and, faux pas along the way. And I always tell people, if you have nothing else to do, and right now you have a lot of free time, if you just Google stupid tweets, it is amazing what you'll get. And a lot of them are sometimes organizational. I mean, I saw one from the Red Cross, for example, during a major hurricane, in which a couple people who were working at a very low level on the Red Cross somehow were able to post things to the official website, put on some things which were not exactly the most appropriate thing in the middle of trying to rescue people from a hurricane. So you're exactly right on that one. How do you go about, thinking about what you just described and doing this sort of mass output of information? Any thoughts on sort of measures of effectiveness? I mean, one of the things I always say organizations have got to think through when they create a new strategy is, how do I measure how we're doing? I come up with a new idea, but measuring whether or not that's effective, and what are the diagnostics, or what are the things that I set as standards of effectiveness to kind of review? Some people might measure the number of messages I'm sending out as a measure of effectiveness. I would first blush from what you just said, I'm not sure that would be the measure of effectiveness I would gravitate towards. So then your other side of that equation then becomes, well, my measure of effectiveness is perhaps how many people are actually looking at it. Well, okay, that may be true as well, though people can turn something on just because they know the boss is talking and sit back in their chair and take a nap, Have you ever seen any thoughts, or do you have any thoughts on how you measure effectiveness, or any tools that you can use in creating a communication social media strategy that might assist you in measuring effectiveness and getting your message out?
Well, I'm kind of spoiled in terms of goal setting because everything on social media is measurable.
Right.
So how many people looked at it, how many people engaged with it, how many people follow you, all of these different metrics. You have to think about your organization's goals. If it's awareness, then go for impressions. If it's engagement, then go for engagement metrics like likes and shares and comments. If you just have to think about your goal setting before, during, and after any time you're doing any sort of messaging. You're not just coming up with posts and sending them out randomly. You have to be more strategic about it. Think about your bottom line goals throughout the entire process. Because if any message you send out doesn't adhere to one of your goals, then why are you sending it out?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In fact, I couldn't agree more, is as you're doing a strategy for anything, we always say strategy is a combination of your ends, your ways, and your means. Ends being your goals, ways being the policies, procedures you're going to try to put in effect, means being resources. In this case, we're talking about getting our message out. We're talking about our resources being the social media platform and the process as we move along. But I think that's a great one right there, is to sit down at the beginning for your communication strategy and determine what is the goal. What am I trying to accomplish here? And then using that to really underscore what you just said in many ways, to measure, to determine how I want to measure it on the other side. Otherwise, you can just get into, I'm blasting things out, but I haven't put that in effect. And you may have to, like all strategies, particularly in a dynamic environment like now, you may have to adjust that strategy and look at different things depending on the message, or find out you're not getting the impressions you want, and think about maybe going to alternative platforms or different timing or different mechanisms of doing that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to turn this over. We've gone for about 30 minutes. I've enjoyed my conversation with Molly enormously, but I think I'm going to turn it over to Tanya to move us on into the question and answer. Tanya, what do you think?
Yes, I can do that. Hello, everybody. Yeah, and you mind if I add something to
Sure.
what you should not do, or maybe what you should do? This was actually a conversation. So our experience here, we do mostly live in-person workshops and whatnot. So this is, this new normal, and using this, Zoom as a way to reach out to people, certainly new for us, and video is something we're getting more and more used to, because it also is the new norm and has been for a while. But a conversation this morning with my colleague Bree makes me think the importance of educating yourself or organizations, training people a little bit on video, as you mentioned, Molly, and more from just even having meetings over Zoom and people doing some really embarrassing things on accident because they don't know how it works. If you just take a few minutes to educate and inform yourself, or as an organization to send out something that says, hey, before you do your first meeting, or maybe your 10th and you still don't really know how to do it, here's a link to instructions from Zoom on how to do this, and maybe send everyone a complimentary little video cover thing that could save some people maybe some awkwardness.
Are you muted, Tanya?
No, I am, but you can hear me through.
Okay.
Molly, you can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Through Jeff's
Okay.
microphone. Yeah. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that in there because I think that's now the new norm as well, and is people doing things on video chat that they wouldn't normally do in a regular meeting.
And also using this webinar as an example, we did a run through of this yesterday.
Right.
Because we want to make sure that people are going to communicate well. And if you want to do, I don't like pre-meetings, but if you are teaching your whole organization to transition to video, maybe one pre-meeting to teach everybody in the organization how to use video, because it could be essential now.
Right, and it can help avoid a lot of weirdness.
Yeah, I think I can jump in on that real quick. We often say to people, remember Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law is anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and normally at the worst possible moment. And when you're trying out particularly a new technology or a new medium, there's lots of gremlins in there as people are getting used to how you go about doing that, and making sure you got the camera at the right level, am I muted or not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those kind of pre-meetings that you're adjusting to a new social platform, I think are essential, because if it fails on the first one or two go-arounds, people are going to lose confidence in it, or they're going to think it's too hard, I can't do this, you don't want to go there. And then I always say, and if you don't believe in Murphy's Law, always remember Schultz's corollary to Murphy's Law, which was Murphy was an optimist, okay? And so when you're talking about using technology, Murphy and Schultz are the two guys you got to remember.
Yes. So I did get a note. I know you can all hear me, but you can't see my beautiful face because I'm not unmuted, and you hear me through Jeff's audio. I know that.
She's a lot better looking than I am.
Jeff and Molly can see me, but the rest of the audience might not be able to see me, but they can hear me. It's because we're in the same room, and if I turn my audio on, it'll probably hurt your ears. So if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the Q&A section. While we take a minute for anyone to do that who does have a question, I wanted to let you know and remind you again that a recording of this will go out tomorrow. You can find all of the previous recordings of our webinars for the last 3 to 4 weeks on our website. You'll get a link to that tomorrow, and you'll get access to all the previous ones as well. And then also wanted to let you know that on Thursday next week, so a week from today at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, we'll be joined by Kathy Maxwell, and she will be speaking on an individual leadership topic. So we've been going back and forth and kind of addressing the two main areas that we address at Diamond Six primarily, or the way that we divide leadership development up in a way into organizational and individual topics. So today was an organizational topic, and then next week we'll address a more individual topic. And Kathy Maxwell will be, her title is Coping with Stress and Social Isolation, Getting a Little Relief During These Fear-Filled Times. She has some really great strategies to help us all cope with the stress and uncertainty and of course anxiety that we're all experiencing at this time, and how to build a little more resilience in ourselves and maybe even in our families and our colleagues as we're all kind of cooped up together and a new dynamic is taking place. So she's going to be joining us for that on Thursday next week, and you'll be receiving information about more about that tomorrow as well as next week in our newsletter and on social media as well. So there's a little bit about that. I do have two questions here that I can read to you. The first one is, can you talk a bit more about identifying a spokesperson for communicating consistently? Should it always be the official leader of the organization? For example, in a school district, this can be tricky. When the superintendent may be the spokesperson, but as a principal, I also need to communicate with my students and teachers, but I don't want to override or conflict with what a senior leader might be communicating.
So I would meet with the superintendent and coordinate with your communication strategy. Of course, you're going to say different things for different audiences. So the superintendent has an audience of that whole organization, but the principal has a whole different audience. It's the same audience, but it's a more selective audience. So you have to think about what your communication strategy is overall of the whole organization, and what we were talking about, the different verticals, those can all have their own representative, especially if they really need to communicate very specific messaging to their audience.
If I could kick in on that as well, I think that's great. Two quick thoughts I would add to that from having dealt with the districts in particular a great deal. That can be really tricky. That's probably why that consistency of messaging is so important, because if the superintendent with the board and the principals comes up with a consistent message they want to get off, then you can vary from that slightly to answer perhaps individual questions. So that consistency is very important. Secondly, I worked for a large organization one time, and the person in charge was very big about us doing what we needed to do immediately and not waiting around and saying, I have no idea. That doesn't work very well, particularly in a moment like this. But what he called the doctrine of no surprises. Yeah. That, he said, surprises are great when you're, I guess for old people for their birthday, like I just had one, surprises are great. But in these kind of cases, they're not. So if you're caught in that kind of a situation where you need to answer somebody's question, you provide that to the best of your ability, but you think it's a sensitive topic, please get some feedback back to me, because surprises don't help me at all, okay? And then the final thing is, and I'm stressing this to a lot of organizations that I talk to, now is an incredibly good time, if you haven't already done so, to revisit what's the mission, vision, and values of our organization. Mm-hmm. And I often say in answering a question, you cannot fail if you begin by saying an answer to a question, well, the mission of blank, blank, blank organization is this, and therefore right now that's the most important thing we're working on. And of course, take that broader mission statement and try to neck it down to the specific question that you're being asked. So it's a good time to make sure people you're working for, if they have not become very familiar with what the mission, vision, and values of the organization are, that's part of your central message that you can take advantage of as well. Tanya.
Great. We have a couple more questions. The next one, sometimes I feel rushed in our communications in this current crisis. Can you speak a little bit about how I decide what's urgent, what's not, and so I don't get caught in a situation where I should have communicated something sooner?
That's a great question. And it makes me think of breaking news because everything right now is breaking news. And just because it's the newest information doesn't mean it's the most important information. So you really have to talk with all of the stakeholders within your organization to figure out what's important and what's not. What's important when Jeff was talking about values and mission statement, having an organization mission statement really focus everything towards those goals, which helps everybody really decide what's important and what's not. Right now, any messaging to students is important in education. Any messaging within the government is important. Hospital communication, very important. We all have to think about things differently now, and our priorities, everybody individually, our priorities are all changing. We have a new normal now, and they have to think about what's important to your bottom line mission statement.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that Molly's spot on. Obviously, you got to react if people ask you questions that are related to safety and health and those things of immediate. You got to react to those things without doubt. The one thing I have learned in a crisis, and I'm confident this one is not different, is we used to say in combat, the first report is normally wrong, or at least partially wrong. So I try my best to, and the news is a good example, and Molly and I work in the news. Boy, one thing that newsrooms are really about is to confirm something before it goes to breaking news. They're not going to immediately, believe it or not, shoot something out that is not had been confirmed, because the first report I found over and over is normally wrong or partially wrong. And I would think that might be a watchword to use as well.
I mean, everybody points to China as, well, early on, everybody pointed to China as a great example of dealing with our current healthcare crisis. And then you look towards China, and then for me, I do lots of work in China. And then I go, well, who told you that? The Communist Party told you that? Why are we taking these reports? We're not just taking, and I see it on TV all the time, people being like, well, China had it under wraps. Well, yeah, because they're welding the doors shut of sick people. That doesn't mean a success of anything. So we really have to look at information, chew on it a little bit more. The breaking news is a perfect example of this. Chew on it for a little bit, especially in times of crisis, and don't be afraid to really take time to confirm things before you say things.
We have one more question right now. In a previous webinar, Jeff stressed a balance between optimism and honesty/realism.
It's hard.
Can you discuss this in the context of messaging? In education, we often message in a very rosy way. How appropriate is that when facing such a crisis?
So when I'm thinking about when I worked at Reuters, and there was an automatic, like I was talking about social flow, there was an automatic feed of stories that would go out. And we shut down that feed during the Paris attacks because it didn't seem appropriate to talk about, Britney Spears' birthday instead of Paris updates. So a lot of times you have to think about the messagings you're sent, and especially in education, you try to be positive all the time on all levels of education, from K through 42. You have to really think about that positive messaging, but in a more realistic way. You can say things in a positive way while also giving them the facts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. But I would add one thing to that, and that's I really applaud what I see some of the different education association districts I work with on their Twitter feeds and whatever, showing photographs, pictures, video, whatever, of all the great things you guys are doing. Because it always bothered me, frankly, even prior to this, that I would read that, people have not as high a positive feeling, particularly towards public education in America, as they once did, which I always thought was wrong. and second of all, inappropriate. So one of the things I know you guys are doing is enormous things. And as a group, you tend to be ones who don't like to stand out and take credit for what you do. So you're right, it's not time for airy-fairy stories on your Facebook page or on your Twitter account or Instagram or whatever platform you're using. I got that. Britney Spears' birthday, we can certainly skip. But I think it's a wonderful time for you guys to make sure and post all the great things that people are doing. You know, just the other day I saw where a youngster was making an effort to thank people who were doing great things. And so he went out and thanked the postman, he thanked the garbage collector, and a lot of people who do routine things, either in a community or in an organization. I'm thinking like food service workers, and I'm thinking like bus drivers in a school district, for example. But those people are the ones that in this particular crisis have become more and more important in some ways. You know, bus drivers are now distributing food to youngsters, and particularly in rural environments. So I don't think there's anything at all wrong, and I would actually urge you to use your social platforms and maybe, I don't know, I'm just pulling this out of thin air, pick a district or an organizational star of the day and highlight that one person in your social media, which is going to raise everybody's morale a little bit, number one, raise that person's morale, number two, and actually says to the whole team, gee whiz golly, if I do something, if I do my job really well, they're going to recognize me and communicate that out to the group as a whole at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Tanya, looks like you got one more question.
No, we've so here, I'll come over this way this time so
Okay.
people don't hear a mysterious voice in the background. And, you know, we're super casual because we're all quarantined here in this little office. No, that was our final question. So I don't know if you have any final thoughts or if Molly has any final thoughts.
I really like the idea of positive messaging during a crisis. I think there's a really great way to balance facts versus, I don't know if you saw this, but New York Post did a story about Andrew Cuomo's possibly nipple piercings. That's a fun, random story that you can talk about. It has something to do with his press conferences. It has something to do with, it's just one of those stories that only the Post can do with their posty headlines. And it seems to fit within that news organization. You kind of have to see what type of fun you can have in this crisis that fits your organization. And it's obvious that we're not going to be overly doing it, but it's good to sprinkle a little positivity on your social media feeds, because social media feeds are supposed to be positive. It's all about positive body image on Instagram and fun hangouts on Facebook. I mean, I had a phone call with my mom over the weekend because it was her birthday, and she's obviously self-isolating in Vermont, which is where I'm from. And we got to wish her happy birthday. I set up a conference call because my grandfather won't be able to figure out video conferencing. So I set up a conference call and we all wished her happy birthday. So little tiny things like that is always a good thing to be positive on social.
Yeah, totally agree. And if you need more, for a small plug, if you need some positivity, last week we talked to Dr. Chris Maxwell about positive psychology and how he gave some really good strategies as well on how to remain positive in uncertain times. So when you receive your email tomorrow, that's a good segue for this recording, you will click on the link, you'll see this recording, and you'll see all previous recordings, including Dr. Maxwell's from last week as well. Jeff, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, thank Molly for taking the time out of her schedule to do this, and this has been terrific. I want to thank the participants for joining us once again for our webinar, and thank you again, as I've mentioned a couple times throughout this talk, for the wonderful things I know you're doing for kids, particularly in school districts or running fine organizations throughout the country, and keep it up, the good work, keep a smile on your face. We look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you, one and all.
Great. Thanks, Molly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.